and a very warm welcome to Bharata First. You're watching Frank Talk with me, Frank Rousan Pereira. Before I proceed, let me ask you, have you subscribed to Bharata First and liked this video? If you haven't, please support us and do so now. Don't forget to hit the bell icon as well so that you don't miss an update from Bharata First. Well, we have an excellent monthly newsletter. Make sure that you subscribe as well so that you get all information from there too. And how can I not tell you about the Bharata First Knowledge Center, our big success story? It is your one-stop destination for all your competitive exams needs. Hundreds are reaping the benefits of the Knowledge Center. Don't be left behind. We now have 26 courses and all available at less than 1,000 rupees per course as part of the early bird offer. What's more, the first 100 to register will get a further discount of 10%. So what are you waiting for? Go to kc.bharatafirst.com and register right now or download the Bharata First app. Don't miss out on this amazing way of learning. All this information along with some must-see recommendations are in the description of the video. Please go through it. And now on to the discussion on the program. The Chinese Communist Party has passed a historical resolution cementing Xi Jinping's status in political history. The document, a summary of the party's 100-year history, addresses its key achievements and future directions. It is only the third of its kind since the founding of the party. The first was passed by Mao Zedong in 1945 and the second by Deng Xiaoping in 1981. It was passed last week at the 6th plenary session, one of China's most important political meetings. As only the third Chinese leader to have issued such a resolution, the move aims to establish Xi as an equal to party founder Mao and his successor Deng. In this edition of Frank Talk, we will analyze the Chinese Communist Party's historic resolution. Joining me on the program today is Professor Srikant Kondipalli, Center for East Asian Studies, JNU. Professor, welcome. And let's talk about what happened, in China over the past week. And it seems like Xi Jinping has only strengthened his hold on the Communist Party and state of political affairs in China. And just as Putin has done in Russia, it seems like President Xi Jinping is going to be the president for life.
Well, we do not know exactly. Thank you, Frank. But we do not know exactly because the plenum communique, not the resolution, but communique, did not mention about the life term. It did praise Xi Jinping as the core leader, backbone, anchor, guiding role providing for China's future path, or the principal founder, quote unquote, of the Xi Jinping thought, which is now being implemented. They mentioned all these high-flying words, but there is no mention about the future prospects for Xi Jinping. Obviously, of course, it does mean that the opposition is getting harmonized by the internal factional struggles. So that's number one. Number two, in March 2018, in the National People's Congress, Xi Jinping extended his term for the president. But in China, the political system is different. The state is subservient to the Communist Party. So Communist Party positions are supreme rather than the state positions, president, vice president, premier, all these are state positions. But the Communist Party is supreme, so we have to see the general secretary position, whether they are extending, or the CMC chairman, Central Military Commission chairman position, which of course Xi Jinping is occupying since 2012. So we have to see these two positions, whether he gets an extension or not. The speculation, of course, is that because of the high-flying words that they used in the communique, not resolution, because the resolution has not been made public so far. The discussion related to each of the provisions in this plenum, the 384 full and alternative members, they have not mentioned what exactly has happened in the plenum, number one. The plenary resolution has not been put in the public domain. they only put up a communique, and the next day, on 12th November, they had only a 13-minute press briefing. So the plenum was supposed to look into the 100 years of the Communist Party's achievements, experience, etc. And secondly, the plenum was tasked to the initiating of the 20th Party Congress next year. So these two tasks in the plenum, and the first task, of course, has been the 100 years of the Communist Party, which they did. I will explain in a while. The second is the 20th Party Congress preparation. For this, there is only one or two paragraphs at the end of the communique. In this communique, they did not mention that Xi Jinping will have a life term as the General Secretary or CMC Chairman. So there is a big if here, which means that the political factional struggles are intensifying between Xi Jinping's faction. He heads 2 or 3 factions. One is the Princeling faction. Second is he is head of the New Zhejiang Army. Zhejiang is a river in Zhejiang province where he served before in the 1990s, late 90s, 2000s. So the other side of the river, Zhejiang River, there is this Xi Jinping's supporters. So it is called New Zhejiang Army. And then he also hails from Shanxi province, where Xi'an is located as the capital, because his father belonged to Shanxi province. So in other words, the Shanxi gang. So these 3 factions he is heading. Then there are the Jiang Zemin faction, which is, of course, the reformist faction under Deng Xiaoping's policies. Also, you have the Communist Youth League, to which Premier Li Keqiang belongs to, and Wang Yang, Hu Chunhua, and others belong to. Hu Chunhua was supposed to be named as the successor to Xi Jinping in the 19th Party Congress, but that did not happen at that time because of Xi Jinping's heavy hand in these factional struggles. So we have to see now what would happen in the 20th Party Congress. So Xi Jinping is heading the 5th generation of leaders after Mao, Deng, Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao. But if he continues as General Secretary and CMC Chairman, then it is very unlikely that we will have a 6th generation of leader in China. We may possibly go straight away to the 7th generation of leaders in China. So that is going to be problematic because experience has to be transferred to the successive political leaders. So in terms of the life term, it is still not clear from the communique. Although it praised Xi Jinping as the core, as the great, glorious, so on and so forth, backbone, whatever, all those shibboleths. Nevertheless, there is still the succession issue is hanging. 1 year is too long in China, in Chinese politics. So I do not see there is a carte blanche for Xi Jinping in terms of the life term. Number 2 is the 100th anniversary, 100 years experience of the Communist Party. Now, this communique does not mention anything negative in 100 years of the Communist Party. It is all praise for Mao, Deng Xiaoping, Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao, and no negative views about the Communist Party were mentioned in this. However, in 1945, there was a highly negative view that Mao Zedong carried in the 6th plenum in that year. He criticized, for example, the Soviet-trained communists. He criticized the various other factions within the Communist Party at that point of time. There was huge tussle between Mao and various others, Chang Kuo-tao, Cao Kang, Rao Shushi, or other leaders, they were fighting. So there is the negative views that Mao took both in terms of policy line as well as in terms of personalities. In 1981, when the 6th plenum of Deng Xiaoping was organized, He also criticized Mao as being 70% correct and 30% wrong. One doesn't know how a personality can be divided into pluses and minuses like this. So there is a precedent. Possibly in future, they will also say Xi Jinping is 50% correct, 50% wrong. We do not know. That is, of course, speculation and depending on the factional strength that anyone has. Because Xi Jinping also had huge issues in the economy, for instance, the fintechs, edtechs, and others, which costed Chinese economy $1.4 trillion so far. In addition to, of course, the decoupling process from the US, from Taiwan, from Japan, from India after Galwan events, we do not know what are the costs for China in all these cumulative assertiveness across the neighborhood. So the sixth plenum is important in terms of taking up the stock of the political ideology and political policies followed, but no negative view of the Communist Party in 100 years. So if you read the communique, it is the Communist Party has no blemishes at all. Although we know that 54 million people were killed in Great Leap Forward, there was also disruption during Cultural Revolution. There was, again, the Tiananmen Square incident. 4,000-5,000 students were killed in Tiananmen Square in 1989, or other costs that Chinese people have because of the Communist Party rule. None of these were mentioned in the communique. So that is one. So which means that the future prospect would be most possibly of Xi Jinping's very high thrust, political thrust in future, which is likely to happen. But I'm not very sure whether he will get a life term, both in the General Secretary and CMC positions.
Absolutely. So since we are here, Professor, what is the game plan as far as Xi Jinping is concerned? Because, does he want to go down as one of the greatest rulers in the history books of China? What is it that he is looking at?
That is true. He is very ambitious, politically ambitious. As a princeling himself, his father was Shi Chun, a revolutionary leader. Of course, he was put under restrictions by Mao during the Cultural Revolution and before. So there is this ambition to be a great helmsman, as many of their authoritarian leaders like Kim Il-sung before, Mao Zedong before, or even Stalin or other leaders were considered to be. So there is that personal ambition. In 2016, in the sixth plenum, once again, the sixth plenum then decided that Xi Jinping will be the core of the leadership. So since then, his personality, his political influence, etc., increased. Secondly, he is very ruthless in terms of demolishing the other factional political leaders. He used the anti-corruption drive in order to drive this point that he is the leader, unquestioned leader. Although Bloomberg published a report several years ago that his sister siphoned off some $800 million. But of course, Bloomberg was banned from China. New York Times published an article on Wen Jiabao, the former premier, about $1.2 billion corruption. But the New York Times were also banned from China. So anti-corruption drive, although it was launched, it was against the factional leaders, rival factional cadres, bureaucrats, army officers, etc. So it was not against his own faction or his own, buddies in the Communist Party. So it is more of a sectarian. Anti-corruption drive was more a sectarian campaign.
Professor, just one follow-up here, since we're here and we're talking about this particular aspect. I want to know and understand this whole issue of, going after the fintech giants and technocrats as well in China. We've seen a lot of that too in the recent past.
Yes, I think Xi Jinping is trying to do a disruption which he wants to, by this, he wants to control the entire economy, politics, and other attendant issues of China. For example, the crackdown on edtechs, fintechs, and car hailing apps, vehicle hailing apps like Titi Chuxing or others, Meituan, the food delivery app. This is to counter the Jiang Zemin's influence. When Deng Xiaoping initiated reforms in 1978 and intensified these after his southern tour of 1992, with FDI flowing in, the connecting to globalization, connecting to the rest of the world, also meant compromise of the Communist Party's hold over many of these. So, for example, globalization led to the glorification of not so manly actors or actresses, the ephemeral aspect in the media. So one of the things that he did was to counter this and say, you have to be very manly if you're a man on the TV shows. So there is that due to globalization, loss of Communist Party's hold. And with this disruption, he wants to reboot the Chinese economy through domestic consumption and less dependent on exports, because exports has brought in dependency with the United States, with Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, and others. So he wants to disrupt this. Number one, he wants to also disrupt the loss of party authority over the economy or culture or various aspects. So this is a disruption. He is calculatedly doing it. Of course, in between, several people have lost jobs, $1.4 trillion losses in the Hang Seng, the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, 1.4% decline in the shares of Tencent, Alibaba, and others. So there is this disruption, but that disruption he intends to bring in by full party control. Party control here means Xi Jinping's control.
Right. So let's talk about the party as well, Professor. What does all of this mean for the Communist Party of China?
Xi Jinping, in the last 9 years, since 2012, he is insisting that all cadres, 93 million cadres, should undergo what he had undergone. During the Cultural Revolution, he was sent to a village and learn from the peasants as part of the Cultural Revolution going down the villages campaign. So he wants everybody else to learn from this hard experience of living in the villages with no facilities, etc. at that point of time. Number one. Number two, he also wants the cadres to imbibe the revolutionary spirit, which again is part of that hardship and learning from the peasants, workers, and so on and so forth. So in other words, he wants this to be repeated all across. And in fact, in the communique also, sixth plenum communique, many of these were proposed that you should not lose the mission of why the Communist Party was established. The mission why the Communist Party was established is to bring the working class to power. Of course, that didn't happen with Jiang Zemin's 3 represents, which now becomes broad masses representing the Communist Party. So in other words, he wants to now bring in the Communist Party. And in the 19-party Congress, he mentioned in the work report of the 19-party Congress in 2017 that China wants to occupy the center stage. So that is where the tussle with the United States has come in terms of global and regional leadership. Galwan is a representation of this regional leadership tussle with India. If India does not relent, then the pressure on the borders will be very high. India should kowtow to China. That is the message that Xi Jinping is driving at in Galwan and aftermath. again with the Biden administration as well, or with the Trump administration before, China is egging on for a conflict in South China Sea, Taiwan Straits, Senkaku Islands, or in other areas. That is the reason why many of these countries got together in the Quad, in the AUKUS, in the other related aspects. So Xi Jinping, with his 2049 plan of China's rejuvenation, he basically weaponized the foreign policy, security policy, economic policy, or political policy within the country.
Absolutely. So what does this mean for the opposition, in the ranks, waiting to try and take over, waiting to come forward? Is there any opposition as far as Xi Jinping is concerned who could possibly take him on at some point in time, and maybe by when?
We do not know, because this is very highly opaque system. And as I mentioned, we do not know the debates of the 384 full and alternative members of the Central Committee who attended the meeting from 8th to 11th. What we see repeatedly in the communique is in the session, so-and-so was said. In the session, so 8 times it was repeated in the communique, which means that it is basically a reportage rather than resolution, or even a communique. It is less than even a communique, the sixth plenum outcome. So there is a big opaque factor in this whole process. We do not know, number one. Number two, there are factions in the Communist Party. As we discussed, there is the Jiang Zemin's faction, which is quite strong because after the Deng Xiaoping's reforms, China rose because of Jiang Zemin's policies between 1989 to 2002. If China had become the second largest economy, it was Jiang Zemin's contribution in terms of the reform and opening up policies, implementing these policies. So as a result, many people have become rich. In fact, over 600 billionaires in China compared to 700 billionaires in the US. 16 Central Committee members are billionaires in the Communist Party. So we actually have to rename the Communist Party based on this. And I hope other communists across the globe also learn from this. The most important thing, of course, is that the Communist Youth League, which is more ideological, is represented in Li Keqiang, Wang Yang, Hu Chunhua, and other leaders. This faction has been relegated to the background. Communist Youth League is actually not very powerful. A rough estimate of 15 to 18% influence within the Communist Party. Jiang Zemin's faction has more influence. I do not know the exact percentage, but we can say 30 to 40%, that kind of influence it's still remaining, because many of them are still the party secretaries, governors, vice governors in the provinces, which is where much of this struggle also happens. For example, the Hubei province, where Wuhan is located, where the virus originated, the party secretary, Mr. Chiang, was dismissed last year when the virus originated. Now he has been accommodated into the central government because of this factional struggle. Although he was dismissed, he is now back. Of course, he is a protege of Wang Qishan, the vice president. So there is Wang Qishan and Xi Jinping are buddies. So one can imagine this, but there is struggle going on at the local level. So factional struggles are quite legendary in China. They actually are very fierce than even compared with the rest of the world, because there is power. You control the Communist Party, you control China. Absolutely. Now you control the regional order and global order to an extent.
Absolutely. And very quickly before I let you go, Professor, one final question. What does all of this mean for India? Is it going to have any bearing?
There was no mention, of course, in this plenum, because the plenum was about ideology, but there are 4 or 5 aspects on foreign policy with which probably we can also look at the India related. So they mentioned about major power diplomacy in the communique, which means that China's sights are now at the global level, regional level, to be the leader. Major power diplomacy or major country diplomacy. They use country rather than power in such occasions. But it can also be translated as power. Anyway, so major power diplomacy would mean that India will be marginalized in the overall Chinese foreign policy posture. Number two, they mentioned about the new type of international relations. Again, it is marginalizing. Somewhere equation would be India is a big country in South Asia. That kind of Cold War, kind of assessment they would drive it. Meaning you are only part of South Asia. You're not part of the global events or Indian Ocean or other regional Indo-Pacific or others. So that is the second kind of implication it is we can draw in the new type of international relations. There is also mention about the conflicts arising. So they are prepared for the eventuality on the borders and so on. There is mention about security, that there is equal representation for economy and security, which means that we probably will see more investment in the military and also in terms of the Galwan and post-Galwan related infrastructure, the well-off society villages or other things that China is planning in the recent times. So there are a lot of indirect implications on India.
Absolutely. All right, Professor, thank you so much for joining me on the program and sharing your views and putting things into perspective for us. I'm going to let you go now. Pleasure having you on the program.
Thank you, Frank.
And before I go, let me once again remind you to like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and share the content as well. Don't forget to register at the Bharata First Knowledge Center. It is your one-stop destination for all your competitive exams needs. Hundreds are reaping the benefits of the Knowledge Center. Don't be left behind. We now have 26 courses and all available at less than 1,000 rupees per course as part of the early bird offer. What's more, the first 100 to register will get a further discount of 10%. So what are you waiting for? Go to kc.bharatafirst.com and register right now. You can also download the Bharata First app. Don't miss out on this amazing new way of learning. All this information along with some must-see recommendations are in the description of the video. Please go through it. That's it from me. See you again next time.